The jungle never truly sleeps. At night, it pulses with unseen life, crickets chirring in rhythmic waves, frogs croaking from hidden puddles, branches cracking beneath creatures that remain invisible. In 1985, deep inside Venezuela's Amazon region, an elderly man rests inside a wooden hut perched above muddy ground on stilts. His skin is leathery from decades of tropical sun, his hair thin and silver. The villagers know him as Helmut Schneider, a quiet German doctor who treats malaria, infections, and snake bites in places where electricity never reached and roads never existed. He asks little in return. Sometimes food, sometimes nothing at all. He speaks Spanish with a thick accent that reminds locals of war films. They trust him. To them, he is a healer. But Helmut Schneider is not his real name. The medical certificate hanging crookedly on his wall was taken from a dead physician in Sao Paulo, and the man sleeping beneath a mosquito net once wore the uniform of the SS. His true name is Isef Hartmann, a former Nazi doctor who conducted experiments on children inside Auschwitz-Birkenau. Pregnant women were injected with unknown chemicals. Twins were dissected while still alive. Medicine became a weapon of cruelty. Survival was measured in minutes, not years. When Allied forces closed in during 1945, Hartmann escaped Europe carrying false documents and gold teeth extracted from corpses. For 4 decades he vanished, moving from Argentina to Paraguay, then Venezuela, always staying ahead of those hunting him. He became a ghost. But ghosts leave traces. Inside a windowless office at Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, analysts began assembling fragments like pieces of a shattered mirror. A prescription written in German found in a Caracas pharmacy. A witness in Paraguay describing a doctor who flinched when Hebrew music played. Bank records showing payments to a clinic in Puerto Ayacucho staffed by no licensed physicians. Individually, the clues meant nothing. Together, they formed a terrifying pattern. One of the last architects of the Holocaust might still be alive, still practicing medicine, still hiding behind a humanitarian mask, while the echoes of his victims demanded justice. This is a story of how Mossad found him. But the trail begins far from the jungle. Munich, 1972. Inside the Ludwigsburg Central Office, fluorescent lights never turn off. Endless rows of filing cabinets stretch across a room that smells of dust and perseverance. Here, German prosecutors continue hunting Nazi criminals decades after the war ended. Most leads end in death certificates or dead ends. But occasionally, a file changes everything. Researcher Klaus Weber was cataloging documents seized from the International Red Cross records revealing how fugitives obtained travel papers under humanitarian cover. Among thousands of forms, one application caught his attention. Hermann Schneider. Occupation, doctor. Destination, Argentina, year 1946. Attached was a faded photograph. Something about the eyes unsettled Weber. Too cold, too calculating. He cross-checked the image with SS medical records. Match found. Isef Hartmann, born 1910, Dusseldorf. Medical degree, Heidelberg University. Assignment, Auschwitz Medical Division, 1943 to 45. Weber forwarded copies to Interpol, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and Mossad. It was the first confirmed image of Hartmann since the war. In Tel Aviv, the file landed on the desk of Zvi Haroni, the agent who helped capture Adolf Eichmann years earlier. Now semi-retired, Haroni studied the photo carefully. The prominent nose, deep-set eyes, scar above the eyebrow to Hartmann's profile emerged. Son of a pharmacist, brilliant student, joined the SS in 1937. Specialized in genetic experimentation, especially on twins. Survivors later testified he selected children personally, promising better treatment. The promise meant slower death. After the war, he vanished into ratlands run by corrupt officials and sympathetic clergy. By 1947, he reached Argentina, then Paraguay, then nothing. Until the jungle whispered his name again 40 years later. The hunters were finally listening. Nearly a decade passed with no sign of Hartmann, until an unexpected clue surfaced in 1982, far from intelligence circles. Dr. Maria Castellanos, a Venezuelan anthropologist studying indigenous health traditions in Amazonas state, encountered a peculiar German doctor while conducting field research near Puerto Ayacucho. He called himself Helmut Schneider, claimed to be retired, and volunteered in villages unreachable by modern clinics. Castellanos noted his outdated medical methods, more consistent with 1940s training than contemporary practice. He refused photographs, grew tense when asked about his past, and wore gloves even in extreme heat, hiding severe chemical scars on his hands. She mentioned him briefly in a government report about healthcare gaps in remote regions, never suspecting its significance. 2 years later, Mossad agent Yael Rothstein, posing as a Canadian journalist researching Holocaust survivors in South America, stumbled upon a report while interviewing officials about European migration. The name triggered alarms. Rothstein requested all files connected to Schneider's clinic and found sparse but troubling records, an expired license, patient complaint about risky treatments, and a registration listing him as director despite no formal credentials. She transmitted an encrypted message to Tel Aviv suggesting a possible Hartman sighting. Mossad leadership knew the implications. After the Eichmann operation, Israel sought to avoid diplomatic disasters. This time, identity confirmation would come first. Legal extradition would be attempted before any co-extraction. In early 1985, planning began for a reconnaissance mission to Venezuela. The objective was simple but dangerous: verify whether Helmut Schneider was truly Isef Hartman. Puerto Ayacucho posed logistical nightmares. The frontier town was reachable only by river or small aircraft. Dense jungle surrounded it. Communications were minimal, and any outsider stood out immediately. Mossad selected 2 agents: David Rotman, fluent in Spanish and experienced in Latin America, and Ruth Kaplan, a trained medic who could convincingly pose as a public health researcher. Their cover: Canadian academics studying tropical disease prevention. They spent months memorizing local customs, rehearsing their story, and studying Hartman's features. In August 1985, traveling as David Ross and Ruth Kleen, they arrived in Caracas, spent a week establishing credibility with officials, then secured permits to work in Amazonas. A rattling turboprop carried them to Puerto Ayacucho, a humid riverside town of wooden houses on stilts and mud streets. They checked into the only hotel run by Senora Delgado, who casually mentioned a German doctor living upriver who treated severe cases when the clinic was overwhelmed. Kaplan asked his name: Helmut Schneider. The confirmation came too quickly. They exchanged silent glances. To avoid suspicion, they used their cover, drafting a formal letter requesting an academic interview about tropical medicine. A local guide delivered it. 2 days later, a reply arrived. Schneider agreed to meet for 1 hour at his home, reachable by a 2-hour boat ride and a jungle trail. On August 28th, they traveled upriver with a quiet boatman named Carlos. Brown water slid past endless green walls of vegetation. After 2 hours, they disembarked and followed a narrow path into suffocating jungle heat. 20 minutes later, they reached a clearing. A wooden stilt house stood alone, chickens pecking below. An elderly man appeared on the porch, cautious but composed. Kaplan greeted him in Spanish. He invited them to sit. For an hour, she interviewed him about his career. He admitted studying medicine in Germany, moving to South America after the war, working in Argentina and Paraguay. He spoke fluently but evasively. The scar above his eyebrow matched records. His hands remained folded, hiding burns. His pale eyes watched everything. Then Kaplan asked about family. He claimed. Schneider claimed everyone was gone, that the war had taken them. But Mossad records showed his parents survived into the 1950s, a small lie that exposed a carefully constructed past. Rotman discreetly captured photos as they left, and back at the hotel both agents compared notes, convinced they had found their man. Yet suspicion was not proof. Mossad needed fingerprints. Kaplan returned alone 3 days later, pretending to seek medical advice for persistent headaches. Schneider welcomed her inside, revealing a sparse interior, a narrow bed, shelves of German textbooks, and a faded diploma from a Brazilian university that Mossad believed was forged. He examined her professionally, wrote notes on a pad, and recommended aspirin. As he turned away, Kaplan slipped a notepad into her bag. Before leaving, she shook his hand, her palm coated with a nearly invisible powder that would preserve his prints. She walked back to the river without looking behind. The next morning, the agents departed Puerto Ayacucho carrying photos and evidence using diplomatic channels. The materials reached Tel Aviv. 2 weeks later, forensic analysts confirmed the match. 12 fingerprint points aligned with SS records. Helmut Schneider was Isef Hartman. Now Mossad faced a dilemma. Venezuela had no extradition treaty with Israel. Hartman committed no crimes on Venezuelan soil. Legal paths were weak. Quiet diplomatic feelers were sent. Officials responded cautiously. They would not formally extradite him, but they would not interfere if Israel acted discreetly. The message was unofficial, unrecorded, but understood. Planning for extraction began. The mission, code-named Jungle Surgeon, aimed to apprehend Hartman and remove him before news spread. 6 operatives assembled. Security specialists, a medical officer, logistics experts, and a pilot. They entered Venezuela separately under false identities. By late October, all were positioned in Puerto Ayacucho. The plan was simple. Approach Hartman under the pretense of a medical emergency, sedate him, transport him by boat, then fly him to Colombia where an Israeli aircraft would take him to Jerusalem. On November 12th, the team moved upriver at dawn. They reached his clearing and found Hartman feeding chickens. When asked for help treating an injured child, his eyes narrowed. Something felt wrong. He switched to German, demanding to know who they were. The leader answered in German, "You are Isef Hartman. You are coming with us." Hartman bolted for the house. The team broke the door, restrained him, and injected sedatives. He shouted that he was innocent, that they were mistaken. Seconds later, his body went limp. They carried him to the boats and vanished downriver. In Puerto Ayacucho, a chartered aircraft waited on a dirt strip, registered to a Canadian mining firm. Hartman, unconscious, was sealed inside a wooden crate labeled medical supplies and loaded aboard. The flight plan said Bogota, but after crossing into Colombian airspace, the plane diverted to a remote airfield where an Israeli transport waited. When Hartman awoke, he was bound in a seat. Venezuela was far behind him. Jerusalem lay ahead. His arrival on November 15th shocked the world. Venezuela protested. Israel acknowledged nothing. In March 1986, the trial began in Jerusalem, charging Hartman with crimes against humanity. Survivors testified in painful detail about experiments on children, sterilizations without anesthesia, and calculated cruelty. Hartman showed no remorse, claiming he was only a scientist following orders. The judges rejected every argument. On July 22nd, he was convicted. His execution followed months later. For survivors, it was delayed justice, but justice nonetheless. The jungle that once hid him slowly reclaimed his abandoned house, as if erasing the last traces of his disguise from memory, forever now gone. Hartman's capture triggered shockwaves across the international community. Headlines exploded with disbelief that a former Nazi doctor had lived undetected for decades, disguised as a rural humanitarian in South America. Venezuela officially protested, accusing Israel of violating its sovereignty, though privately officials avoided defending a war criminal. Diplomats exchanged tense statements, but the world's sympathy lay firmly with the survivors. For Mossad, the operation was declared a success, not just for bringing Hartman to justice, but for proving that time and distance offered no protection. Inside Israel, public reaction was intense. Many remember the Eichmann trial and saw this as a continuation of unfinished history. Survivors filled the courtroom during proceedings, some trembling as they faced a man who had haunted their nightmares. Outside, crowds gathered daily, holding photographs of lost relatives. Hartman remained cold, emotionless, staring forward as if untouched by the suffering he caused. His lawyers argued he had acted under military orders, repeating defenses rejected since Nuremberg. The judges dismissed every claim, stating that crimes against humanity could never be justified by obedience. Witnesses testified for weeks. One woman described how Hartman injected her sister with experimental chemicals, watching silently as the child convulsed. Another survivor recounted sterilization procedures performed without anesthesia, while Hartman recorded observations like routine data. Each story tore through the courtroom, exposing horrors many believed impossible. When the guilty verdict was read, a hush fell over the hall. Some wept, others closed their eyes in silent prayer. Hartman listened without reaction. Months later, his execution was carried out at Ramla prison, the rare instance Israeli law permitted capital punishment. He left no apology, no regret, only a final statement insisting history would vindicate him. It never did. Back in Puerto Ayacucho, villagers struggled to accept the truth. Some refused to believe their gentle doctor was a murderer, insisting he had saved lives. Others felt betrayed, realizing care they trusted came from hands once stained with blood. His wooden house stood abandoned, slowly collapsing under rain and vines until jungle growth swallowed it entirely. The clinic registration was quietly removed from government files. Officially, Helmut Schneider never existed. For Mossad, his name joined a growing archive of fugitives hunted and captured. Yet the operation raised troubling questions. Was kidnapping justified when extradition failed? Did the severity of his crimes outweigh national borders? Governments debated these issues in closed rooms, never publicly. Israel's stance remained firm. Crimes of genocide transcended sovereignty. Justice delayed was still justice. Critics warned such operations risked diplomatic fallout and set dangerous precedents. Supporters argued that allowing perpetrators to die peacefully would dishonor victims. The world watched as Israel reaffirmed its position. For survivors, the trial offered something long denied: validation, a chance to speak, a public record of truth. Some said it helped them sleep. Others said nothing could erase the past, but at least it acknowledged it. Hartman's capture also sent a warning to remaining fugitives. No hiding place was truly safe. From jungles to suburbs, identities could be unmasked. Files reopened. Tips poured in. Mossad quietly pursued other leads across continents. Each operation carried risk, but also purpose, not revenge, accountability. In classrooms and museums, Hartman's story became part of Holocaust education. Teachers explained how ordinary men committed extraordinary evil, then attempted to disappear. Students learned that justice sometimes arrives slowly, but persistence matters. Historians noted how intelligence work evolved from brute force to subtle infiltration. The operation proved modern tracking, documentation, and patience could expose even the most careful escape artists. Hartman's case entered textbooks as an example of post-war accountability. Meanwhile, international law scholars debated universal jurisdiction, questioning whether nations should prosecute crimes committed elsewhere. Some argued it prevented safe havens. Others feared abuse of power. Yet no one defended Hartman. Even critics admitted his guilt was undeniable. The moral dilemma remained unresolved. But for those who survived Auschwitz, the outcome felt right. Not perfect, but right. In Tel Aviv, Mossad officers archived the mission files, photographs, reports, fingerprints. Each page symbolized years of pursuit. The operation ended, but the message endured. Time does not erase guilt. Distance does not erase memory. The hunters remain. The jungle once hid a monster. It no longer can. Hartman's story did not end with his execution. In many ways, it only began. News of his capture spread across continents, reigniting long-dormant investigations. Prosecutors in Germany reopened archives. Survivors came forward with testimonies they had buried for decades. Historians revisited camp records, matching names to faces, numbers to lives. Hartman became a symbol, proof that even the most carefully hidden criminals could be found. For families of victims, his conviction offered something they never expected to see: closure. Not peace, not healing, but recognition. The world finally acknowledged what had been done to their loved ones. Memorial organizations documented every detail of the trial, preserving witness accounts so future generations would never forget. Schools requested transcripts. Museums added new exhibits. His crimes were dissected in documentaries, each retelling reminding viewers that evil often wears ordinary faces. In Israel, survivors of the trial felt like a second Nuremberg, a public reckoning that reaffirmed the value of truth. Many said they no longer felt invisible. Their pain had a voice. Their losses had names. Hartman's insistence that he was just a scientist was rejected not only by judges, but by the public. Scientists spoke out, declaring his work a distortion of medicine, a betrayal of ethics. Medical associations condemned him. Universities removed any lingering references to his research. His name became synonymous with betrayal of trust. The Hippocratic Oath, meant to protect life, had been twisted into a tool of destruction. That lesson resonated strongly in medical schools worldwide. Professors used his case to teach students about responsibility, about the danger of blind obedience, about the importance of questioning authority. Hartman's past also forced South American governments to confront uncomfortable truths. How many fugitives had been sheltered unknowingly? How many communities had trusted men who carried dark histories? Quiet audits began. Immigration records were reviewed. European names resurfaced in dusty ledgers. While few cases matched Hartman's brutality, the message was clear. History had not stayed buried. Journalists uncovered networks that once smuggled Nazis to safety. Churches issued statements acknowledging past mistakes. Officials expressed regret, though accountability remained limited. Still, awareness grew. Silence was no longer acceptable. For Mossad, the mission reinforced a doctrine they already lived by. Justice has no expiration date. Officers who worked the case described it as emotionally exhausting. Some said they dreamed of camp victims they never met. Others admitted guilt for operating outside international law. But all agreed the outcome mattered. They were not hunters seeking revenge. They were guardians of memory. Each captured fugitive represented a refusal to forget. In intelligence training programs, the operation became a case study. How patients uncovered truth. How minor clues led to major breakthroughs. A prescription here. A witness there. Small details forming a larger picture. Recruits learned the importance of persistence and moral clarity. They were taught that not every mission involved bombs or spies. Some missions carried the weight of history itself. Hartman's capture also affected Venezuela. Though officials denied complicity, local communities felt shame. People questioned how they could have trusted him. Some villagers visited his abandoned house, now overgrown, as if seeking answers from collapsing wood and rusted tin. Others refused to go near it, calling it cursed. Eventually, the land was reclaimed by jungle, vines swallowing walls, insects nesting where he once slept. Nature erased his hiding place, but not his memory. Internationally, debates over sovereignty intensified. Legal scholars asked if states should act when extradition fails. Human rights groups argued that accountability for genocide outweighed borders. Governments remained cautious. Yet most agreed that letting war criminals die peacefully felt wrong. Hartman's case became a reference point in legal discussions about universal jurisdiction. Conferences cited it. Papers analyzed it. The world struggled to define justice in a borderless context. Survivors watched these debates with mixed emotions. Laws mattered, but so did outcomes. They wanted perpetrators named, shamed, judged. Hartman's execution sent a message louder than any conference. You cannot escape what you have done. Even decades later, even in jungles, even behind false names, the past waits. And it always catches up. Years after Hartman's execution, his story continued to echo across generations. For Mossad, it became a benchmark operation, studied by new recruits as proof that intelligence work could serve justice, not just security. Officers who participated eventually retired, but their experiences were passed down like oral history inside classified halls. They spoke of jungles, false names, quiet fears, and the heavy responsibility of deciding another human's fate. The mission reinforced a central belief within the agency. Some crimes are so vast they transcend time. There is no statute of limitations for genocide. That principle guided future operations, shaping how Israel approached historical accountability. Each new lead, no matter how old, was treated seriously. Files reopened, names re-examined. The hunt never truly stopped. For survivors, Hartman's capture validated their suffering in a way no apology ever could. Many had lived their entire lives believing the world forgot them. Now, Their stories were part of legal records, books, classrooms, and museums. Some survivors visited Jerusalem during anniversaries of the trial, lighting candles in memory of those who never made it out. They said justice could not bring back the dead, but it could protect the truth. Their grandchildren listened, finally understanding what silence had hidden for decades. Hartman's case gave them language for inherited trauma. It turned whispered family stories into documented history. Globally, the case forced governments to reflect on their past roles. Some admitted they had ignored warnings. Others quietly updated immigration screening policies. Church groups confronted historical involvement in escape routes. Though apologies came slowly, they came. Academics published new research uncovering how post-war networks helped war criminals disappear. The world learned that evil rarely vanishes. It hides, adapts, waits. Hartman was proof that en Puerto Ayacucho. Life returned to normal. Children played near the river. Boats carried supplies. The abandoned hut collapsed completely, consumed by vines and rain. Some elders still spoke of the German doctor who once treated fevers. Others refused to mention him. The memory split the town. Was he the man who healed or the man who killed? Both were true. That contradiction disturbed people. It taught them that humans could carry two lives inside one body, a helper and a monster. The legal world continued debating universal jurisdiction. Hartman's case appeared in law textbooks as a precedent. Some scholars argued that covert captures endangered international order. Others insisted that without them, criminals would enjoy peaceful retirements. There was no perfect answer. But most agreed that in Hartman's case, the moral outcome outweighed legal discomfort. No country wanted to be known as a refuge for genocide architects. For Mossad, the message sent by the operation was strategic as well as moral. Fugitives took notice. Tips increased. Some former Nazis living quietly in Europe came forward voluntarily, fearing similar exposure. Others fled deeper into isolation. But fear worked. It forced movement, and movement created mistakes. Hartman's story entered popular culture. Documentaries aired. Books were written. Students debated it in ethics classes. Filmmakers portrayed the tension between law and justice. Every retelling reinforced one idea. Time does not erase guilt. Aging does not soften responsibility. Hiding does not cleanse history. in Jerusalem. The court building where Hartman was sentenced remained a symbol. Tour guides mentioned it. Visitors paused, imagining survivors sitting silently as truth unfolded. It became sacred ground for memory. Ultimately, Hartman's capture was not about revenge. It was about record, about refusing to let killers fade quietly into old age, about telling the world that some lines once crossed cannot be uncrossed. The jungle where he once had breathed the same way it always did. Insects hum, branches crack, but his ghost no longer walks there. Justice pulled him from the shadows and placed him under the brightest light possible. And that is the legacy. Not fear, not triumph, but remembrance. Because as long as stories like Hartman's are told, history cannot be rewritten. The hunters may rest, but memory never does.